President Trump is expected to speak by phone with Russia's Vladimir Putin later this morning. Trump made the announcement on his social media platform yesterday, saying their discussion will focus on finding an end to the war. Last night, French President Emmanuel Macron said he'd spoken to Trump as well as his counterparts in the UK, Germany, and Italy. Macron called on Putin to accept the 30-day ceasefire proposed by the U.S. and Ukraine. It comes days after Ukrainian and Russian teams held their first direct talks since the war began. Let's bring in President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. He's the author of the weekly newsletter, Home and Away, available on Substack, and columnist and associate editor for The Washington Post, David Ignatius. Good to have you both. And Joe, this phone call, of course, after talks that involved lower-level staff members that did have some progress.
Lower-level staff members and the Pope. The Pope talked about this, too. Richard, we have much to talk to you about. Golfing, the Preakness, just the extraordinary ending of the Preakness. But why don't we start where Katty and I were talking, and that was the election held last night. Once again, to quote John Meacham, populism is a strong starter, but not always the strongest of finishers. And if you look at the last two elections in France, look at the election in Poland, I mean, I could go around Europe and time again, we have seen that in the ultimate races for power in European countries, and of course we can talk about Canada, we can talk about Australia. The same story is being rewritten time and time again this year, is it not?
Absolutely. These things go in cycles, Joe. You know this. Politics has pendulums, and there's nothing automatic, and often there's an anti-status quo, and that could help populists. It could also hurt populists in some ways if they're the incumbents. Well, there's some very interesting tests in this country in the midterms and then again in 2028, because ultimately elections become referenda on the status quo and on the trajectory, as people see it, of the country. So populists don't have, shall we say, any sort of a structural advantage.
David, let's turn to the call that President Trump is going to have, in 4 hours' time, I'm looking at the clock, with President Putin. Clearly an important call in the context of Putin not turning up in Istanbul, the two high-level principals not having that meeting in Istanbul. What do you think, what are you looking for to come out of this? Is it as simple as just setting the date for a meeting, or are you going to look for more?
I don't think there'll be a breakthrough in this call, other than to have a face-to-face. President Trump has set up his own personal intervention as the key dynamic, basically saying this can't be solved without me. And he's now interposing himself. The phone call follows a series of rejections by Putin and his lower-level officials of virtually everything the United States has requested to end the war. The U.S. asked for a 30-day ceasefire. Ukraine said yes. Russia said no. The U.S. asked for meetings in Turkey at a high level. President Trump was prepared to go from the Middle East to Turkey for those meetings. Ukraine was there. President Zelensky was in Turkey. Putin stayed away. Everything we know says the Russians think they're winning and don't want to stop the war without significant gains. Right now, they're demanding, as a condition for a ceasefire, Ukrainian agreement to give up land that Russia hasn't conquered yet. It's quite a demand. So I think Trump is facing a real problem here. Unless he pushes Putin back and makes him understand you're not going to get the whole pie here, I think he's heading toward a meeting where he either makes a concessionary settlement to Putin, which will stay with him for the rest of his presidency, or he ends up in a real confrontation with Putin, and the meeting breaks up in a difficult way. But today's phone call will be a prelude to the real action, which is coming. But there are a lot of storm clouds in the sky as they pick up the phone.
Yeah, the sequence of the call is interesting. Trump speaking with Putin first, then Zelensky again with NATO allies. When he spoke to Putin for the first time earlier this year, there was a lot of criticism that he spoke to Putin first and then Zelensky and sort of just informed Zelensky, hey, here's what Putin and I talked about. You should live with it. There's a slightly different tenor this time around, Richard Haass, but David Anshe just kind of hinted at it. The great question is, will President Trump ever stand up to Vladimir Putin? He has not. They've passed his prologue. He's never done it. And yet we see Putin defy American calls for ceasefire. Some of the largest drone strikes of the entire war happened over the weekend in Kyiv with the loss of civilian lives. People I've talked to close to President Trump say he is eager, has been for a while, eager to have a face-to-face with Vladimir Putin. But usually if a summit reaches a presidential level, the deal's basically done. And then you go and shake hands. They're nowhere close here. So what do you anticipate coming out of this call? Is this the moment where Trump is finally going to get tough with Putin?
They're not in the same zip code. Let's be honest. Putin shows no interest in a deal. David had it exactly right. Putin wants to continue the war because he thinks he can accomplish his aims militarily. Then he'll turn to diplomacy. So for Donald Trump, it's at most he'll get a meeting with Putin. And Putin, by the way, looks forward to that meeting because he thinks he'll get a lot of what he wants, maybe a concessionary agreement. The real issue is not going to happen at the table. It's not going to happen in the call. It's going to happen in Washington. And it's going to be a decision by this administration whether they are going to resupply the pipeline to Ukraine. Are they going to continue more military and intelligence support of Ukraine? If they do that and they say, we're going to keep doing that, that is the only way to begin to shatter Vladimir Putin's confidence that time is on his side. So it's quite simple. It doesn't matter what the president says on the phone. It doesn't matter what Witkoff says at the table. The only thing that matters is whether they create a context or a structure for these negotiations where Putin realizes he either needs to compromise or he's going to have to continue fighting a war he cannot realize his objectives. It's almost that simple.